Good morning. Today we're going to be talking about 7-segment displays, specifically how we're going to wire and set them up. But before we get into that, we're just going to talk a little bit about what a 7-segment display is. So a 7-segment display is in a lot of different electronic devices, but most recognizably it's going to be in your digital clocks. When you look at like the number 8, for instance, there are 7 segments that make up the 8. There are the 3 horizontal segments and the 4 vertical segments. Technically, a 7-segment display might also have an 8th segment, which would be a decimal point. When we look at a 7-segment display, there are 7 segments, and like I said, there's the 8th, which is our decimal point. Each segment is its own individual LED. However, similar to like the RGB LEDs we were working with in class, all LEDs have a shared common leg. And depending on the 7-segment display, that shared common leg might either be a common anode, which means that they all share the same positive, or it could be a common cathode, which again, they're going to share all the similar negatives. When we look at this slide here, we can see the labeling for each of the LED segments. You may want to jot this down on a separate piece of paper so you have it, or you might want to just refer back to this as you're going through for your wiring, but you're going to need to know what each of these different pieces are. And if you look at it, it actually starts at the top at like 12 o'clock, and it goes in clockwise fashion, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then it finishes at G, which is in the center. And then we have the decimal point down here in the bottom. All right, so let's jump to Tinkercad and we'll start wiring this up in there. All right, so here we are in Tinkercad. I have an Arduino, I have a breadboard, I have it set up properly so that all my power pins are running here. And let's start grabbing some pieces. Okay, so over here underneath components, if I type in segments, then like a 7-segment display will pop up, or I'm sorry, segment. And I can grab the 7-segment display right here. When I drop this into my breadboard, I need to make sure that later on we're going to be adding more segments to create more numbers. So for right now, let's stick to like the right-hand side of your breadboard. You also want to make sure that the bottom set of pins, which is down here, and the top set of pins up here are on opposite sides of the trough and the breadboard itself. So when we have the 7-segment display noted, we can select whether we want a common anode, which again is a common positive pin, or a common cathode. We're going to say common cathode, so we have a common ground. That way when we write our LEDs to high, they're going to turn on, and when they're written to low, they're going to be off. I'm also going to just change the name of this, and I'm going to call this single or single digit, because ultimately we're going to be counting to 99 with 2 of these digits, a 10-place digit and a single digit, but for right now we're just starting with the single digit, so we're going to go with that there. Okay, so when we hover over each one of these pins, they are named, okay? The first one here is our decimal point, DP. Then we have our C segment, which again, this is A at the top, B, C, so C is referring to this here. The next one is our common, which in this case, it's a common cathode, so this is going to go to ground. D, E, G, F. Again, we have a common at the top. You could use that to go to ground up here instead of down here. You won't need both. And then we have our A, and finally our B. So in order to avoid blowing our LED out, we're going to need a resistor. So I'm just going to select a typical resistor, and I want to bring this into my ground on one end and the common pin on the other, which is right here. Okay, so I'm going to align these. And right now my resistance is set to 1 kilohertz, or I'm sorry, 1,000 ohms. I'm going to change this to be 220, but something that's really important, with the last activity when I changed that, a lot of you made that change, but you didn't change the unit. So this is 220,000 ohms, red, red, yellow. We want this just to be 220 ohms. So make sure that you make that change. It should be red, red, and brown. The bigger that resistor is, the more dim all of your LEDs are going to appear. 220 ohm is going to be enough when we're not blowing the LEDs, but they're also bright and we can see what's happening here. 1,000 ohm resistor would be okay. 2,200, or I'm sorry, 220,000 ohms is just way too big. So we're going to start setting that up. Now I can start to wire our individual units, and just kind of like as a example to begin with here, instead of wiring to the Arduino, we already have like this segment wired to ground, and like if I hover over this, I can see that this is my decimal point. So if I go to wire my decimal point pin, which is in this row of the breadboard, to positive, and I start my simulation, you can see that my decimal point is on, but everything else is off. Okay, and that would be true too. I believe like this is my C segment. So again, that's going to be this one here. So when I start my simulation, boom, that's on there. And if I had multiple wires coming to positive, now both of those pieces of the LED segment are on. Okay, so that's going to be really critical to us because, like, let's say number 1, for instance. If we want to create the number 1, we need to set segment C to high, which is, it's in positive right now, so that's basically equal to high. And we need to send segment B, which is here, to high as well. So if we set that up to high there and we start our simulation, now we see the number 1. Okay, so when we go through these things, we're going to be assigning our digital pins to like 1 or something else. So that'll be helpful for us moving forward. So, okay, stop my simulation. I'm going to delete these wires because at this point it's really time to start like wiring it up. But you definitely want to check that your common cathode is connected to ground and that those things run before you really start wiring things up, because it's just going to get to be difficult. So let's begin here. A decimal point, we're not going to use our decimal point in this activity, so you can just ignore that pin altogether. Segment C, I guess that I'm going to set segment C to be pin 2, and I'm just going to create a list for myself. C is going to be pin 2. I'm writing that down as I'm going through this process. This is D. D is going to be 3. E is going to be 4. And then we're going to go to the opposite side of the board here. So this is what, G? So G I'm going to bring out to be 5. And I just want to add like, if I click on this and I double click maybe, yeah, I can add like a new segment and kind of like edit how that wiring is happening there. So that's what, G, and that was my 5. Next I have F, which is going to be 6. So I'm going to take F and we're just going to kind of bring it around. Okay, next is another common, so I can skip that. Next is going to be A. So 7 is going to be A. And then 8 is going to be B finally. Okay, give me a second here and I'm going to clean up these wires. Okay, so I've cleaned up my wires here. All these are going to digital pins, so being like green, yellow, blue, anything like that is fine. Again, all my ground and positive wires are labeled. So we have this set up at this point here. And I've also, for, if you guys want to take a look at it, I've set this up as well. You can pause the video at this point to help set up your board. I have C going to 2, D to 3, E to 4, G to 5, F to 6, A to 7, and B to 8. So again, like if I want to turn the number 1 on, I'm going to turn segment B and C on. And B, I'd need to digitally write 8 high. C, I would digitally write 2 high, and that would turn those on. If I wanted to turn the number 3 on, I would need A, B, G, C, D. So again, A, B, G, C, D, all those would be set to high, and I would be able to go through and create the number 3. So let's just try setting up the code, and then we'll try to just make like a couple real basic numbers. So give me 1 second. Okay, so here we go. For our code, I'm going to get out of blocks and just go to text. And I'm going to get rid of all of this stuff. I hate how they just automatically put like a blank code into here. So I'm going to do a multi-line comment. This is going to be Mr. Ashline, 7-segment display, period, either 6 or 7, depending on which one you're in. And we're going to start setting up some constant integers. We're going to set up a lot of them, okay? We're going to set up constant integer A, which is going to be one of our LEDs, segment A. And segment A is going to be set to pin 7. And we're going to go through and copy this and make a bunch of these. Okay, so A is 7. B, according to my sheet again here, B is 8. So I'm going to say, oops, B is going to be 8. And I'm just going to go through and I'm going to label each one of these. So you can do the same thing based upon the wiring that you have. Okay, so I've set up a constant integer for A through G. Again, A is 7, B is 8, C is 2, D is 3, E is 4, F is 5, and G is 6. Okay, and I have to go through, I think I'm going to start with the serial.begin to begin with. Set that up. And now I need to set up my pin mode. Okay, so pin mode for A is going to be an output. And this is setting my setting my LED to an output. Okay, I'm going to copy this and paste it along for each one of these. Okay, so at this point I've set my pin modes for A through G. They're all outputs, they're all LEDs. I've also in my loop right now just set up a little test program. I've set everything to be low. So if I start my simulation, nothing should help. Nothing should happen. Where is my error? Unterminated comments. Whoops. Okay, so I add that. Now I can start my simulation. So again, nothing is turning on. So let's just say I'm going to start my simulation. Let's say that I want to work on the number 1. So again, 1 is going to be segments B and C. So when I come into here, I'm going to say, okay, B is going to be high, and C is going to be high. When I start my simulation now, I have the number 1. If I wanted to create the number 3, we need both B and C high. We also need A, G, and D. So let's try turning those on. So A, G, and D. So let's start the simulation now. So something is either wired wrong or not quite set up right. So let's see here. That is segment F. So let me see if I can figure what's going on there.